Hola, ¿cómo estás? Hoy vamos a hablar del presente del subjuntivo y queremos hablar de qué es y cómo lo usamos. Ustedes van a oír alguna información en inglés y también van a oír información en español. Vamos a repasar las primeras 4 páginas de este paquete de apuntes. Es decir, vamos a hablar de cómo vamos a conjugar verbos en el presente del subjuntivo. Queremos saber también qué es. Lo que vamos a discutir en clase esta semana es cómo usamos el subjuntivo. Y vamos a empezar a trabajar con eso ahora y vamos a seguir el segundo semestre. Lo primero que deben saber, espero, del año pasado, es qué es el subjuntivo. Y esta sección va a ser en inglés. You need to be aware that we use 3 different moods of verbs. These don't necessarily have to do with tenses, which are what we've worked through in the past, but moods. And you've actually used 2 of them in Spanish 2 and Spanish 3 without even necessarily being aware of it. You may have heard about it last year, you may have heard about it in Spanish 2 potentially, but you may have also been using them without even knowing. The one we've used the most often, and that we do use the most often, is the indicative, which is used for a statement of fact. So you currently know el presente, like el presente del indicativo, is what we consider to be the regular present tense. El pretérito, el imperfecto, el presente perfecto, el presente progresivo, el imperfecto progresivo. Todos esos tiempos verbales son en el indicativo. They're all examples of the indicative. You also worked, especially in Spanish 2 and hopefully a little bit in Spanish 3, with the imperativo or imperative, which refers to commands. You know how to form informal, or in other words, 2 commands, formal commands, usted commands, and plural commands. That should have been discussed, at least briefly, in Español 3. Now we're going to be working with the subjuntivo, el presente del subjuntivo, and we use a subjunctive when we talk about what one person wants someone else, or some other people, to do. Así como formamos el presente del subjuntivo. Para los verbos AR, vas a empezar con la forma yo en el presente. Después vas a quitar la O y vas a añadir estas terminaciones. Es, hemos, es, en. Ahora, por favor, pausa el video y conjuga el verbo apoyar en el presente del subjuntivo. Después, por favor, enciende el video otra vez. Para los verbos ER y R, también empiezas con la forma yo en el presente y vas a quitar la O y añadir estas terminaciones. A, as, a, amos, ais, an. Oftentimes you may hear teachers say that we flip the endings when we use the subjunctive, when we conjugate verbs in subjunctive. In other words, for AR verbs, you'll notice that for the most part, we're using ER endings. The main difference being that the yo form and the la usted form, first and third person singular, are the same in the subjunctive, and they're not in the regular present indicative. For ER and IR verbs, you'll likely notice that these are, for the most part, regular AR endings, with the exception, once again, of the first and third person singular, yo, and the la usted forms, which are both a. Ahora, pausa el video y conjuga el verbo tener en la página 2 del paquete. Después, vamos a seguir. A couple of other things you need to know. Stem changers in the present follow the same rules in the present subjunctive that they do in the present indicative, otherwise known as the regular present tense. So, por ejemplo, defender, which changes from e a ie, dormir, u a u, lo siendo o a ue, perder, e a ie, y jugar, u a ue. They keep their stem change, just like they would in the present tense, except for the nosotros and vosotros form. So you keep your boot for those of you who are very visual. if you have to conjugate or work with or visualize a stem-changing verb in the present subjunctive, it may be helpful for you to draw that boot around the verbs that do have the stem change and leave the ones that don't have the stem change out. Another thing you need to be aware of is that verbs that end with kar, gar, and zar have the same spelling change in the subjunctive as they do in the yo form of the preterite, which means that verbs that end with kar are going to change to QUE, Q-U-E, no hay acento. Verbs that end with gar are going to change to GUE, G-U-E, no hay acento. And verbs that end with zar, Z-A-R, have the same change as they do in the yo form of the change to se, and they have that same spelling change as I said in the yo from the preterite. In the subjunctive, though, these spelling changes, kar to ke, gar to ge, and zar to se, stick with the verb for every single conjugation. There are also some irregular verbs that you really should know. So please make sure that you copy these down in the 5 boxes in your packet on páginas 3 y 4. So we have dar to give, de, ste, demos, des, den. Estar to be, este, estes, este, estemos, estes, esten. Ir to go, vaya, vayas, vaya, vayamos, vayáis, vayan. Saber to know, sepa, 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 sepamos, sepáis, sepan. And ser to be. Sea, 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 seamos, seáis, sean. Now what I'd like you to do is give the verbs at the bottom of página 4, the bottom of page 4, a shot. What you're going to want to try to do here is you've got acercarse and llegar, which have that spelling change there. You're also going to work with conocer, which in the regular present indicative has the irregular yo form of conozco. So you have to work with that in order to conjugate the verb in the subjunctive. Finish this up, and then tomorrow in class, we'll address any questions, we'll go over the conjugations with the warm-up, and we will be ready to move forward with how the heck do we use this? Muchas gracias. Buenas noches.